Well, greetings, this is Chris Poff, the Florida Real Estate Wizards. And with this video, we want to cover one of the most stressful and confusing times in your life, which is when you go to purchase a home, you go to close on it, and the closing for most people is pretty confusing and pretty overwhelming. Buying a home is stressful for most people anyway, and when you get to the closing part, it's really stressful. Partly because it's the most expensive item you'll buy in your lifetime, and you only do it 1 or 2 or 3 times in your lifetime, so it's not something you're a specialist at, and also it's stressful because it's a big purchase, and so you want to get it right the first time. So the whole process of marching towards closing, there's a lot of things that go into that, and so we can break that down for you, but in general, there's 2 or 3 things that we'll talk about in this video, and then we'll actually break it down if you're paying cash for the home or if you're financing the home. Those are 2 different costs, and so we'll talk about that. But let's talk about why the closing looks like it is, and it looks like it does. And the one thing is that the closing, the title company or the attorney that's doing the closing is going to follow federal guidelines, and we call it a HUD statement. It's a closing disclosure, a closing statement, and so it's gonna be on a form that looks something like this. And the form that we get is a little bit different look than what you get. We get one for review, and then you get the one to finally sign off on it at the closing table. So the other thing is that it also is a summary of the purchase agreement. So when you sign a contract to purchase a home, in that contract, it breaks down what is the seller responsible for closing and what is the buyer responsible for. There's also all sorts of other things, line items on the contract that talk about, well, what if the seller defaults, what if the buyer defaults? But in that contract, it also talks about who pays for what at closing. So that's also what is in the closing statement. Now, I mentioned the differences between a cash and a financing deal. When you go to buy a home cash, people say, well, what's my total closing cost? That's what I need to know, because I know I'm buying this home for $200,000, but what does that mean when I go to close? Is it $203,000? Is it $218,000? So that's why it's stressful. There's an unknown there, and we don't actually know, and the title company doesn't actually know till we have a firm day of closing, because there are also prorations for property taxes, interest on the loan, things like that. So we never will know until almost the day of closing or a few days before what the actual exact closing costs are. Now, we can tell you if you're paying cash for a home, it's going to be 1 to 2% of the cost of the home. So if you're buying a $200,000 home, 1% would be $2,000. So you take the $200,000 plus $2,000, and you're going to pay approximately $202,000 at closing. So, or like I say, for 2% it'd be $4,000, $204,000, but it's drastically lower than if you're doing a finance deal. If you're financing that home, and most of you will be financing, the closing costs are more like 5% of the sales price. So you take $200,000 times 5%, and that's $10,000. So it's a lot higher, and this closing statement actually breaks down the line items of what goes into that $10,000 worth of closing costs. And it's never exact. You never can take 5% and just say, oh, it's $10,000. It could be $9,480 or it could be $11,000. But in general, it's approximately 5% of the sales price, and that's pretty safe to estimate. Now, in that, especially if you're financing, that has to do with all sorts of things like the state doc stamps and the intangible tax that the state is going to charge you for taking out a loan on that property. And the lender will also collect property taxes and home insurance premiums. So again, that all adds up to more than if you were to pay cash, because normally they don't require as much from a cash buyer because the cash buyer is taking more responsibility for it. The cash buyer is responsible for paying their property taxes at the end of the year, so nobody collects up front for property taxes, whereas the lender is going to cover their butt and charge you up front, take out a little bit each month to pay for the property taxes, and many times they'll charge a full year's worth of property taxes and property insurance up front just to be safe, so they have that up front to pay. So the next videos will be a breakdown. There will be 3 different links. One is for if you're the seller, what are my closing costs breakdown, versus a buyer that's cash, and that'll be a different link to click on. And then the third video would be on if you're financing, what are the closing costs there. And like I say, we are here for you. If you have any questions whatsoever, from start to finish, we help buyers. We've been doing it 22 going on 23 years, and we help you to figure out the how and why, what goes into searching for the home, what are the considerations, if you're financing, all the way through the loan. We help you through that process and finding the home and making the offer and getting it towards across the finish line at closing. So if you have any questions, give us a call or a text, 407-908-8023.